and welcome. The world is going through greater geopolitical uncertainty than it has at any point in time in the recent past. And to talk about what the post-Trump world means for India and the rest of the world, we're here at the World Economic Forum at Davos and kicking off our coverage with the world's #1 political risk guru, Ian Bremmer. Mr. Bremmer, thank you very much for taking our time.
Sure, all good to be with you.
And when there's so much buzz around what Trump becoming president again could mean, who better than you, whose job it is to delve in uncertainty and probability. So thank you.
Yeah, could be that.
Trump takes over and everyone's wondering what are amongst the first few things he's likely to do.
He's going to be in such a stronger position than he was last time around. So, I mean, his election agenda, his promises on deportations of illegal migrants, his promises on tariffs on other countries, I mean, these are actually going to be implemented to a much greater degree than I think anybody expects. And he's going to make much bigger demands of other countries around the world, right? He wants the Russia-Ukraine war over. He wants the Middle East wars over. He wants other countries to address and align their economies and their political decision-making more closely with the United States or else. Point is that in 2017, and you and I were in Davos in 2017, and President Trump, you know, was not nearly as well respected, as not nearly as well listened to as he is going to be this time around. So the transition is very dramatic.
So I don't know if the respect has changed very much, but his position of authority most certainly has.
It's a respect for power. It's not a respect. Well, and actually, for some leaders, it's a respect for who he is. I mean, you know, we've got the inauguration happening today, and Giorgia Meloni, a G7 world leader, is there. That would not have happened in 2017. Javier Milei from Argentina, presiding over one of the best stories in the world today economically, is going there to see him. There are a lot of leaders in the world that legitimately feel more aligned with Trump than did back in 2017. So some of it, I think, actually some of it is respect, even if you may think it's misplaced respect, but clearly respect for power. That is something that everybody is feeling right now.
He also seems far more certain of what he's doing, more in control, looked at from far closer to the action. How do you see Trump 2.0 being different from what the world saw the first time?
Well, domestically, Trump has control of the GOP, where in 2017, the Republicans had coattails that Trump had to ride. So not only does he have the House, does he have the Senate, does he have a 6-3 judicial majority, but also all of the appointees are loyalists to Trump. There's nobody like Mike Pence or Gary Cohn. There's nobody like Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo or Jim Mattis. I mean, literally every person he has appointed, some of them are well respected, some of them are not, but they all share a willingness to do what Trump wants. So the first point is that he's truly consolidated power domestically. The second point is that the United States, from a relational perspective, is in a much better position than other countries. They're enemies. They're adversaries. Russia's in severe decline. Now, they weren't in 2017. Iran has just lost their empire by proxy in the Middle East. Not the case in 2017. China's having the worst economic period since the 90s, maybe the 70s, not the case in 2017. And even America's allies, who aren't in that bad condition, but their politics, of course, are a lot worse. Look at countries like South Korea and Germany and Canada, where their governments are falling apart. Look at even the anti-incumbent sentiments in places like France and in the UK. So, I mean, the Americans, with their economy coming out of the pandemic much stronger than any of their peers, also are in a much stronger political position. So I think that when you look at Trump wanting to undo an American global order, which is unheard of, really. We've never experienced that. That's why the geopolitics is so unstable. But he's also in a much stronger position to be able to affect that he was not the first term at all.
Let's spend some time on what Trump could mean for India. The one issue that's got a lot of people worked up is immigration, because A is his approach on illegal immigrants, There's also a big debate raging in the United States over H-1B visas. What do you think is most likely going to happen on the issue of immigration, legal and illegal?
On illegal immigration, Trump won the election in large part on that issue. It was one of the top issues, for many people, the top issue. And not only that, but one that the Democrats really failed to address. So he feels very strongly about it. He feels like even if it leads to higher inflation in the United States, and it will, lower tax revenue, lower consumption, all those things are true, but he's going to address it. You are looking at 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants in the United States right now. I would not be surprised if 1 million of them are forcibly deported in the first year.
Well, where will they go and who will take them?
Well, they'll go back, number one. So Trump has already told the Mexicans, if you're not willing to take everybody, including some from countries that came through Mexico but aren't necessarily from Mexico. The president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, has said she doesn't want to do that, but we know that there's a negotiation there. So, the reality is they're not going to be welcome in the United States, and America can cause a lot of damage if you are the country that they came from and you refuse to deal with that, you refuse to engage. So those numbers are going to be big. On the H-1Bs, you saw the fight between Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, who looks like he's already forced out of Doge and it hasn't even started yet. That's quite something. Level of uncertainty among the appointees is always a question, but they very much support H-1Bs and legal immigration, especially among more skilled workers, but a lot of what I would call deep MAGA, as opposed to dark MAGA, not the globalists, but instead the populists that support Trump. They're not interested.
Back hard.
They don't want immigration of any sort. Now, if you ask me who's likely to win, usually Trump goes with the money, right? And these are people that donated a lot to his campaign. Elon Musk is by far the most powerful advisor around Trump, so I don't expect that there are going to be big problems around H-1Bs. Now, there are a lot of Indians that might look at anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States and say, I don't feel very welcome in America. The Statue of Liberty today doesn't reflect American values. It did after World War II. It did after World War I. It doesn't today. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of talented Indians who can work anywhere in the world, they're coming from the best universities, they have incredibly fungible skills, maybe a lot more of them will go to Canada. Maybe a lot more of them will go other places. And I think that's a concern, because it's not just about setting legal policy for the United States. It's also about, are you welcoming to people from all over the world? And America First doesn't sound very welcoming, right? A lot of women from India might say, I'm not very interested in going to a country where they're actually taking back women's rights. A lot of gay people might say, no, I'm not so interested, given what I hear from the U.S. right now. So I do think that the values, the fact that the Americans don't really know what they stand for in terms of values right now, will have a chilling effect on some legal immigration.
Is Elon Musk at the moment the second most powerful man in the United States?
Yes.
Do you see his bromance with Donald Trump continue, or could these two mercurial people have a blowout?
He's clearly the most powerful not president in the United States. And in some ways that was true even before Trump was elected, given his role in the public square, given his role in the military, industrial, technological complex with SpaceX in particular. I think now that Trump has been elected and that Elon has spent more time with him than anyone else, without question, and has even, sort of inserted himself in legislation directly, even though he has no official appointment, though we're told he will have an office in the White House, another norm being broken and being normalized by the United States.
Lots of conflict of interest.
Lots of conflict of interest.
How can that not matter?
Lots of conflict of interest with Trump setting up for himself and for his wife cryptocurrencies that people are putting billions of dollars into. None of this is normal. None of this is leading by example. If Narendra Modi were to have meetings with a head of state or a CEO and bring in Gautam Adani, I promise you, in Davos, they would be calling India a banana republic. They would say, what are you doing? But when the most powerful country in the world does it, it's not a banana republic. It is a new order. It's a new way of doing things, and you have to react to it. So what's happening is that we are embracing what I call a G0 world, right? The law of the jungle, that the strong do what they want, and the weak suffer what they must. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. It's not one that people expected from the world, and specifically not from the United States since the Soviet Union collapsed. Look, American values, as you and I know, and we've debated this before, they're frequently hypocritical. They're not equally implemented. It's not like the United States has always been a paragon of exceptionalism around the world. Look at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Look in Guantanamo. Look at the financial crisis. All of these things. And yet, at the end of the day, the United States was still a country that you would say was standing up for U.S.-led multilateral institutions, was standing up for a global free market with rule of law, was standing up for collective security, was standing up for democracy, right? That is clearly not the case anymore. That is being decisively rejected by President Trump and his administration. And I think that is going to drive enormous uncertainty in the world.
I want to bring you back to that question of whether Trump and Musk continue to cohabit and work together. Will they have a likely blowout?
I don't think that they're going to blow up. A couple of points here. First of all, Musk himself, people say, oh, he's on the spectrum, you can't contain him, you know, he says whatever he wants, and so he's going to upset Trump somehow. I don't see that at all. Elon Musk has never said a bad word about Xi Jinping,
Sure.
Not once, right? And the Indians know this very well.
Sure.
He's very careful. Is it because suddenly his brain works when it comes to China and it doesn't when it... No. He knows exactly what he's doing. It is useful for him economically. Trump is more important for Elon Musk than Xi Jinping, very clearly. Elon is now in the position to become the most important member, the most powerful member of the American military-industrial technological complex, arguably the most powerful institutional space in the world. No one else is close. So Elon is going to be very careful not to screw that up. Meanwhile, Trump has always been effective at managing people that are much more rich and powerful than he is. And Elon is particularly powerful in the ways that matter to Trump. It's not like he has a big army, but he has hundreds of millions of people that follow him. He makes headlines. Trump cares about that. He gave $250 million to the Trump administration. Trump cares about that. He can use Elon as his bomb thrower in chief. And that basically is the role that he's playing when you look at what Elon's been saying about the Germans, the French, the Canadians, the Brits, American allies. Some of those tweets, Trump has been looking at Elon and his phone when Elon put them out. So it's not like Elon is doing it in secret and then Trump is getting angry. They're workshopping this
You
stuff.
think so? When
I know that for a fact.
Elon Musk pushes in favor of the German far-right party or against the current government in the United Kingdom, or about Canada, making fun of the current Prime Minister, you think that's happening in cahoots with Donald Trump?
I know for a fact that some of those posts were done when Trump was watching Elon do it. So there was active discussion. I wouldn't say every single one, but I know that that's the case. So he's not changed. Suddenly he's 78 years old. He's like, oh, I think differently about this. Clearly the same. Also, something that your viewers probably don't know is that the key economic cabinet members are not going to be confirmed in place until probably the end of February at the earliest, which means for the initial weeks, you have a lot of the White House advisors who are much harder line on tariffs that are going to be working to implement policy fast. So certainly on China, I expect that Trump is going to come out of the box quite quickly and put additional tariffs on the Chinese. Wouldn't surprise me if we see that in places like Canada and Mexico too.
So what kind of tariffs? Because he's spoken from 25 to 60s, there's a wide spectrum. Where do you think he'll actually end up?
I think with the Chinese, he probably starts somewhere around an average of, 25% tariffs across the board. It's not going to be 60. But all of these are negotiating points.
Sure.
All of these are points meant to maximize leverage by the Americans to get other countries to respond. But he wants to show that he's serious about this right out of the gate. And he also doesn't want countries to think that they can avoid sort of American power. And that'll be true for India, too. For India, I think, and you and I have said this before, India is the one major country out there that was always going to do well, irrespective of whether Kamala Harris or Trump became president. That's still true. Nothing has changed there.
Will he implement tariffs on India? Extra tariffs?
It wouldn't surprise me if on some goods you actually were to see the Americans put a squeeze on India. But I think it'll be more about aligning Indian technology with the United States. And that's a fairly comfortable set of asks for the Indian government. So I don't see anything close to a crisis coming here.
There are two cases, one on Panu, in the United States, and then the second case is on Gautam Adani, which have been linked in some ways to the inauguration of Donald Trump. People wondering whether the new government will pursue these cases the same vigor as the last government.
Yeah, and I think we don't know that at all. I mean, so much of that would have to do with whether or not Trump personally feels very strongly about this case, and also to what degree the Department of Justice is going to be firmly politicized under Trump. There's been an intention to make that happen, but you know that Matt Gaetz, who was, an incredible loyalist and clearly unfit for the job, probably the most unfit person that Trump has tried to appoint this time around, and there have been several, right, was basically thrown under the bridge by a large number of Republican senators. And so Trump gave up on him, and you haven't heard Trump mention his name since. So it might well be that the Justice Department actually runs in a more independent fashion on most cases, not those involving Trump himself, but on most cases. Having said that, you look at his FBI appointment, and that is a 50-50, could go either way right now, Kash Patel. That implies greater weaponization. And Trump does feel like the court system, the FBI, has been used against him by his enemies. He wants to now redress that. And he might, over time, use that to help friends. Whether or not he would consider those two cases to involve friends is something he hasn't opined on.
Trying to use the Justice Department or investigative agencies to further one's political agenda. If this were happening elsewhere, you said the world would call this a banana republic. Is this the new normal? Do you think that this is where the Republican Party stays even 4 years hence once Trump is gone? Or do you think that there could be a reversion to mean?
Look, there has been an erosion of American political institutions going on for decades now. This is not new. It's speeding up. It's getting worse. It used to be that Supreme Court justices were confirmed by almost all members of both parties. Now they almost never get a vote from the other side. That's a new breaking of a norm. I still think that the jury system in America, where you determine the outcome of cases, is independent and fair. I still think that even though there's a 6-3 Supreme Court, that those justices act by and large independently, irrespective of who is president. So I don't believe that the judiciary in the United States has suddenly become subservient to the executive, but it's under threat. And certainly, I think the danger is there that with President Trump, who believes that he has impunity for any acts that he would possibly commit, legal or illegal as president, I mean, that is frankly not compatible with rule of law in the United States. I also think that even if the judiciary stands as independent, the reality is that if somebody investigates you, right,
Sure.
It's going to affect your life. It's going to affect your family. If Elon Musk decides to tweet against you publicly, other leaders are going to say, well, I'm going to have to listen to him because otherwise I'm going to screw up my relationship with the United States. So I think that you have behavior adaptation that you already saw from Mark Zuckerberg, but you're going to see it from world leaders. And that is a new normal. If the world's most powerful country is saying, I don't care what you think about rule of law, but you better do it my way, you're going to act differently than you would have acted if President Biden had said that, or if a previous Republican president had said that.
What do the next 4 years likely mean for the US-China relationship, arguably the most important bilateral relationship in the world?
Yeah.
Is the antagonism going to get worse because Trump and Xi have been on the phone, speaking to each other, talking about these being meaningful conversations? Will they be able to work together, or will the fragmentation grow?
And Trump says he wants to fix the TikTok situation. It's not clear that he can. But he nonetheless has made those statements literally just in the previous hours. There are good reasons to believe that Trump is interested in assessing whether a deal with the Chinese is possible. He's always like that. I mean, it certainly was true with North Korea first time around, would be true with Russia as we talk about a ceasefire, would even be true with North Korea. Look at the summits he had, right? So never say never, but I'm skeptical. I actually think that U.S.-China relations are going to get much worse over the coming months. And I think one reason for that is because the U.S.-China relationship is actually very complicated. There are a large number of issues where there's no trust and there's real confrontation. And one of the reasons why Biden was successful in stabilizing that relationship is because he put a lot of effort into the actual engagement. He set up 25 high-level channels between the two countries, and they were working those channels regularly. I see no circumstance when that's going to happen under Trump. So Trump will say, I'll have a meeting with Xi and it'll be a good meeting. That's not the way things get done in China.
Sure.
You actually have to engage throughout the Communist Party in all of these areas, some of which have a fair amount of, I wouldn't call it independence, but at least input into the system. And there are so many areas where the GOP is strongly angry with China, where Trump's national security top advisors are all very angry with China. I don't see it. Instead, I see tariffs. I see a tougher national security environment, and I think the U.S.-China relationship is heading for a trade war.
How should India navigate this coming trade war? There's a lot of talk of how China +1 could be advantageous to India. It hasn't fully panned out that way. What, from the outside, are your recommendations of how India could make the most of the situation that's unraveling around us?
Look, India is privileged because of all the countries that want to hedge between the U.S. and China. India is the strongest, India is the biggest, right? So you have more capacity to hedge than Mexico. You have more capacity to hedge than, Laos, right? But still, the pressure that's going to come on India for doing less with the Chinese, I think, is going to be substantial.
Really?
But yeah, because I think Trump is going to be uncomfortable with it. You've already seen this on national security. You've got this new AI ruling on advanced semiconductors, and there are 19 countries that are privileged, not including some NATO allies, not including some EU members, and certainly not including India. And so the Americans are going to demand that India is much closer to the United States, but you're going to have to do a lot to align with it, and some of that will antagonize your most important trade partner, which isn't America, it's China. Right, and that I think is going to be harder over time.
Because that comes at a time when India and China are just about trying to mend bridges. There's been a deadlock along the line of actual control. We're working backwards around it. So it's going to be a very tricky situation.
That's
How
right.
do you see it play out?
That's right. Look, I was very pleased to see the Modi-Xi summit. I was very pleased to see the withdrawal of some troops from contested territory. I think that it's very important that India and China have a stable relationship, have a relationship where both can talk about all of the issues that divide them and try to be constructive together on the global stage, especially because India is strategically more aligned with the United States and China is strategically more aligned with Russia, for example. So India plays a very important role. What I'm saying is there's going to be more pressure on that role going forward under Trump, and it's going to be hard for India to deal with.
Let's spend some time on Russia and Ukraine. And what do you think in the next few months is most likely to happen in the theater of war?
In the near term, you're going to see an escalation because both sides will try to put themselves in a better position to negotiate, and they know those negotiations are coming soon. So that means the Russians will attack more critical infrastructure, try to destroy Ukraine's energy capacity, maybe take a shot at assassinating the president if they think they have one. The Ukrainians will send more missiles deep into Russia. They might also try to assassinate, other military leaders. They just got one a few weeks ago. That is an escalatory environment. But there's a lot of pressure to have a ceasefire, and I think that there will be a ceasefire this year. I think that ceasefire will fundamentally lead to a partition of Ukraine, even though no one is going to accept that as an outcome. That will be the de facto reality. The two questions, one is what does the U.S.-Russia relationship look like on the back of that, right? I mean, are there any sanctions that are removed or reduced or not? Because, you know, a ceasefire doesn't end the war. A ceasefire starts the negotiations, and I think it's going to be very hard to end the war. I think Russia will still be very antagonistic towards the West. The second point is, does a ceasefire reduce the conflict between Russia and frontline NATO states, where they've been engaged in all sorts of illegal activities, frankly, all sorts of warlike activities, not just disinformation, but promoting violent crime, arson, even assassinations. The CEO of the largest German defense company, Russia tried to assassinate. They tried to blow up some cargo planes in Europe. That's terrorist activity. So if that doesn't stop, and I'm not sure it will, because I think that the Europeans will still be arming Ukraine to the teeth. The Europeans will still consider Russia an enemy, and they'll be frozen hundreds of billions of Russian assets. I suspect they'll still be fighting.
We've just seen a truce between the Hamas and Israel, and we've seen Iran unable to try and use the proxies that it had. How do you see the situation in West Asia play out over the next 12 months?
I see, of course, the Gaza ceasefire is an early win. I expect Trump will get a lot of early wins because he's in such a strong position. This is one of the first. It's 42 days. There's 33 hostages that are being released. Will that lead to a phase 2 agreement? Maybe. I'm not sure. I think that Israel's more interested in continuing the fighting afterwards, and as long as Trump gets the American hostages out, I'm not sure he cares as much, right? He already gets to announce, look what I did. But the bigger danger, I mean, the war is not going to be what it was 6 months ago. There's not as much for the Israelis to hit. Hamas doesn't have the military capabilities. Hezbollah,
how much of its
story.
Structure still stands, the organizational structure?
Well, its military capabilities are largely gone. The tunnels are gone. The weapons caches have been blown up. Now, the people that are willing to fight, that remains pretty robust, because if you're Palestinian, it's not like in Gaza, it's not like you have, sort of employment opportunities. And these are people that are becoming more radicalized by the day, given the nature and the extent of the war. So I think that if Hamas is an army, they're much weaker. If Hamas is an idea, then they're much stronger. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. Hezbollah, of course, is much weaker. Hezbollah was stronger than Hamas. They were the strongest non-government military operation in the world. And
why did all
Iran
these
destroyed.
capitulate in the way they did? The Syrian regime, all of Iran's proxies, which were so wanted in geopolitical circles, thought of as being a very strong counter to Israel and the United States, they just seem to have come apart.
Well,
why did they collapse so spectacularly?
The main reason is that Israel has escalation dominance in the military, in intelligence, and in both defensive and offensive capabilities, so that there's no longer any deterrence on the part of those leaders. So Israel can do what they want against Hezbollah. No one can stop them. The Iranians can't threaten Israel, oh, don't do that, or we'll blow you up. No, you don't have the ability to get missiles to target and kill Israelis. And if you do, they'll destroy your regime. So, I mean, the reality is Israel, with very strong support from the United States, Biden and Trump, are able to determine the pace and the level of all of these wars. And even Hezbollah. No, now Assad was a surprise, because HTS, during the 2-week uprising, were told by the Turks, we're happy to have you attack, but don't go all the way to Damascus. And the Russians and the Iranians were supporting Assad, and yet Assad's own military was completely incapable of fighting. That, I think, surprised pretty much everybody in the South.
Netanyahu is talking about regime change in Iran. Do you think Israel can pull it off?
No, not by itself. Of course, regime change is ultimately a matter of the Iranian people, and because the Iranian military and the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are very willing to repress the Iranians using extraordinary force, the Iranians are going to have to show incredible courageousness for them to be able to overturn this despotic regime. Yet, Israel can nudge, and the fact that Israel has destroyed Iran's empire, it feels like 1989, when the Soviets lost the East Bloc, but they still had the country, right? And now there are domestic challenges inside Iran, and Israel's making it worse for them. And America's going to make it worse for them, too. Under Trump, you'll see tougher sanctions. The big question is whether they would be willing to go after the nuclear facilities, and Israel can't do that by themselves. They need American support. I'm not sure Trump wants to risk that war.
What's your view on whether Trump would deploy his big bombers to go after the nuclear facilities?
In the early days, I think no, because I don't think that Trump wants to risk $100 oil. But, you know, over time, I know there are people inside Trump's administration that want him to do that, and the Israelis want him to do that. So, again, never say never. I wouldn't expect it early.
Lastly, what's your number one nightmare? You spend so much time looking at global risks. What keeps you awake at night?
Nothing keeps me awake at night because, you know, we work hard and hopefully we sleep hard. But honestly, I think AI, it's the thing that excites me the most because the use cases are so transformative for human ingenuity and also for industry. But we're not close to regulating it effectively, and it's moving much faster.
Do you see that change this year? Because
no.
governance is not really keeping up with the speed of change of AI and
not
its
even
capabilities.
Close. Not even close. And
is that the way it'll stay through the year?
Yes, that's the way it'll stay through the year because the Americans are going to lean into trying to beat the Chinese in an arms race. And, you know, last time we did that was with the Soviets on nuclear weapons, and you know, it led to 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I'm not sure right now.
So what's your scenario of an AI crisis between, say, China and the United States? What could it look like?
Well, let me say more broadly. When I look at the geopolitics of the world today, I think the question is whether the appropriate analogy is the 1930s or the 1950s. I think the 50s are a better analogy because we're not heading for World War III. But we are heading to an unalloyed arms race in artificial intelligence between the Americans and the Chinese. And it's not going to be slow and incremental like the nuclear race. These things are moving incredibly fast. And again, when I say countries like India are going to have to make decisions, who you align with technologically and how deeply is going to be the most important decision for your sovereignty for a long time.
But Trump's moves can lead to counter moves from his adversaries. If he thinks he can do whatever he wants, what's stopping Xi from making a go for Taiwan? There's a lot of talk about how 2027 could be the definitive year. Each time you say no, and I wonder why.
I say no. Well, it's been many years now.
Yeah, I've been asking the same question.
Right, each time. It's mostly because it's always been because the Chinese aren't ready, because it'll cause more damage to them, and at the end of the day they're reasonably rational. Now if Xi Jinping gets much older and doesn't listen to anyone and starts getting bad information, maybe I'll get more concerned. But for now, the Chinese don't have the economic capability, they certainly don't have the military capability, and they don't need another crisis like that. So I don't see a Taiwan crisis in the near term.
Ian Bremmer, I couldn't have thought of a better way of kickstarting our coverage of the World Economic Forum. Thank you very much for joining us at the India Studio. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool. Okay, covered a lot.